Hello and good evening, everybody. My name is Steve, and welcome to everybody in the audience that's joining us today. Welcome to the special webinar all around the election results special, focusing on how the recent results could impact your plans in France. My name is Steve Eakins. I'm a currency specialist over at Lumon. We're a French property currency specialist, and I'll be your host this evening. A little bit of housekeeping before I introduce you to the panel that you can hopefully see in front of you on screen. From a housekeeping perspective, please note that we'll be recording this and sharing this round for everyone who's joined and everyone who perhaps has missed this, so bear in mind that we are recording the session for today. Equally, post-event, you'll get an email from us with all the relevant contact details of all the panelists this evening, meaning that you can approach any of us to answer any questions that we might have left unanswered. Now, this is a special one around the election, obviously, and we have been inundated with lots of questions. So we will try and go through as many as we can. But please also do note that post-election or post this webinar, a member of the Lumon team will give you a call to make sure that we've tried to answer all of your questions, see whether or not we can put you in contact with anyone that might help with your journey in France. Right, well, I'm going to introduce you to the panel you've got in front of you here. They're going to give a little bit of information as to who they are and what they do, and then we'll come back round and talk a bit about how the recent election results, both in the UK and in France, have impacted the industry types that are represented on screen for you today. So first off, I'm going to go to Simon. Simon, thank you for your time in joining us this evening. If you can kindly introduce yourself, your area of expertise and background, please.
Thank you, Steve. Good evening, everyone. My name's simon.eveleigh. I work for a firm called Blevins Franks. We're a firm of financial planners and wealth managers based in France. I've been in France for 16 years now. The company's been going for nearly 50. And our area of expertise is around helping people as they move out of the UK into France to make sure that they structure their finances in the right way, do things in the right order, particularly with regard to French taxation, lifetime taxes, also taxes on death, and make sure just your assets are structured in the right way so that your move to France can be as simple and straightforward as possible.
Thank you very much, Simon. And over to Fab next, please, kindly. Good evening.
Well, thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. So I'm Fabien. I go by Fab, it's easy to pronounce. So I'm Fabien, founder and managing director of FAB French Insurance and FAB Expat Services. Basically, we help English-speaking expats move to France, hopefully making the process as simple as Frenchly possible.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Trevor, please. Hiya. Good evening.
Yeah, hi, Steve. I'm Trevor from Leggett Immobilier. Trevor Leggett. We are international agents in France. We sell about 10% of international sales in France, which is a fairly decent sale across 48 departments. Happy to help.
Thank you very much. Well, pleased to be standing next to everybody today, virtually, I suppose. Between everyone, we're obviously representing it. It's nice to be standing next to other pillars in the industry. So I very much think that between us, we should be able to answer the over 100 questions we've had submitted as part of the registration process. Now, we'll be going through these questions and going through how the election has perhaps impacted all of these industry types represented, but please do note that you've also got the option to engage with us live today through the chat function, so you can submit live questions to us, and again, we'll try and go through as many of them as we can. First off, back to Simon, if you don't mind, with these election news. Obviously, there's a few questions and queries, well, to be honest, quite a lot around what these new governments on both sides of the channel might very well do to impact wealth and wealth planning. What are the most frequently asked questions that you're getting asked at the moment, Simon?
Well, if we talk about the French elections, a lot of the questions are around the change or potential change to the wealth tax. That's the big one. Macron changed it when he first came in as president, made it a tax on property only. Up until then, it would have been on all of your assets. And the extreme left are very keen on changing back to the old system, indeed, maybe even going further than that. But even the Rassemblement National, the Le Pen's party, they were also talking about making changes to wealth tax. So that's the major one. But also the left in general are talking about raising tax across the board. So all of that has scared people. Although I've got to say, with the Olympics going on and then the August holidays, I don't think we're going to see much happen in the next few weeks.
Thank you. And loads of questions have come in with regards to insurance changes and plans with visas in particular as well, Fabien. What are the questions that you're getting most of at the moment, and what are those answers to those frequently asked questions at the moment?
Yeah, well, luckily insurance is a boring topic, so nothing new on this one, or nothing in the horizon, at least for now. But yeah, on the visa bit, yes, the far left wants, I mean, that would be kind of a good news. They want to kind of broaden visa regulations, so that might be good news. Although, I mean, the rules are fairly standardized now, so let's see what happens. Given the fact that they don't have majority, I really think, like Simon was saying, I think it would go even further, like not just summer, like even after like fall and winter. I don't think much would change, at least not during the past couple of years, following couple of years. But yeah, the thing that we're talking about was mostly to introduce more flexibility with visas, which might be appreciated though, because at the minute it's actually the UK is where the rules are applied the most strictly compared to all the other countries on the planet. So that would be appreciated. Yeah.
Thank you. And lastly, Trevor, there's been loads of questions and queries around any impact to the property market. But for ourselves here, are actually seeing uplift in the amount of inquiries and interest moving over to France. It's still one of the main demographics internationally, but how have you and the wider Leggett network seen things following in the recent market?
Well, I mean, Steve, we've had probably the best month in July that we've seen for over 2 years. So it seems as if there's been a bottleneck created, obviously, from the instability over the last 2 years. And, you know, there comes a point where people just have to get on with their lives. I can't think of any other reason, quite frankly, because there's no really good economic indicators coming out really anywhere. I can't see the banks are being any more willing to lend. So I really think it's just a case of people have been sitting back, waiting, and they're going, well, maybe things aren't going to change, so let's just get on with our lives. You know, people can only put things off for so long, and then they have to move forward with their plans, and that would appear to be what's happening.
Well, an interesting statistic was when everyone registered for the event, and we've had nearly 300 people register for it, over 20% of them are looking at making that move over to France in the next 4 months. So it really does show the demand of people that are looking at this at the moment.
We haven't seen a drop in prices that we expected. We expected, quite frankly, a drop in prices to accommodate the higher interest rates. But as the supply side of the business has been very slow, and a lot of people have been hanging on to cheap mortgages, as we mentioned before. A lot of people have got, like, you know, 1% or less mortgages. And of course, mortgages in France are fixed for term. So they're fixed for 20, 25 years. Then, of course, a lot of people aren't very keen to give them up. They want to hang on to those mortgages, which is perfectly understandable, which has limited the supply side of the business and has propped up the prices. So, and I think, you know, when people now are sort of going, well, you know, it hasn't dropped as we thought it was and doesn't look as if it's going to, property price reasonably is being sold quite quickly. So the market is definitely picking up, and it's definitely quite a bit stronger than it was a few months back.
What I'd equally add as well, from a currency perspective, which is obviously a keen bit for anybody making that international investment or international move, there has been a big spike in demand as a result of sterling's recent strength. So pound to euro rates are multi-year, much higher than most people have been considering or planning for in the last 6 months. So what we've also seen is a drive in demand and interest in our service. Currency is normally something that prospectively people put at the end of the to-do list, to be honest, and look at it once they found that dream property and got everything in place. But a growing amount of them are looking for more education and information as to how to manage that and indeed take advantage of these recent highs. So something I'd highlight for the audience that might be on that journey is using a specialist firm. We offer bank-beating exchange rates and much better service. We're equally regulated on both sides of the English Channel, as well as over in the US, which allows clients to buy and hold funds early, so even before opening up a French bank account. And equally, there's been demand for forward contracts. What a forward contract is, in essence, is a buy now, pay later option. So it allows people to lock in the exchange rate at that higher level, even if they might not have funds available. Simon and I have mentioned before, plenty that have been making international investments and might already have international investments. There's been a pickup in demand of people who have been previously holding sterling nominated investments and have been exploring moving it into dollars or euros as a result of that gain. So yeah, something to consider as the pound to euro rate's gone up by just under 3% in the last 90 days. So good news for everybody on this call, perhaps, especially if you're coming from the UK, because your budgets have got a bit bigger. So Trevor might be able to find you an even bigger property with that same sterling budget. We'll see, right?
Yeah, there's been quite a lot of big sales, Steve, actually. I mean, the budgets seem to be higher than they have been for a long time. So, interesting time.
I would agree. Well, at this point, we're going to dive into the questions because there's quite a few questions that have been submitted at time of registration and a few live in the event tonight as well. So do make sure to use that chat function as we go through these for you. We'll try and make these as valuable and as useful for you as possible. Some of these questions that have been submitted do probably require a little bit more one-on-one time to get a bit more clarity on your personal circumstance to give a more comprehensive answer and all the value to that, but we'll do our best to answer as many as we can through the next 30-40 minutes, but feel free to keep them coming today. First one, there was quite a few ones, which I think, Trevor, you're best placed to answer on this one. A lot of people are looking at moving into France or buying in France for the very first time, so they're looking for a bit more confirmation and information as to what the process is to buy in France, what the kind of timelines are involved, what kind of advice you'd give on planning those trips, etc. So that's the first question. Over to you, please, Trevor.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've had a pretty awful beginning to the year weather-wise, and we didn't really get summer arrive until the beginning of sort of July this year. And then it came all at once, and now we're suffering 40-degree heat. I don't know what it's like down where you guys are, but up here it's unbearably hot. But obviously with the sun came the buyers, and you know, people don't like really, you know, people don't put their properties on the market, funnily enough, when it's like the weather's terrible, because they feel that they don't present very well. So there was a real slow start to the year because people weren't putting stuff on the market. A lot of them weren't coming out because the weather was appalling. You know, I think the fact that we've got past the elections in the UK and in France, somewhat unexpected in France, more so than in the UK. We knew it was going to come in the UK, maybe not as soon, but it came out of the blue in France following the European elections. But we got sort of the least worst result, I think. You know, it's the least destabilising of the two options. But we are going to be looking at, as the UK, I've heard, is looking at wealth tax equally coming to the UK. I've heard, you know, the new Chancellor is talking about introducing wealth tax to UK residents, which may mean that the wealth tax, if it comes back in France, from what they are suggesting, seems to be less, you know, it seems to be less than what they're proposing in the UK. Whether they'll get through what they want in the UK, but quite frankly, at the moment, I'm sure Simon would agree, is that taxes in the UK are somewhat higher than they are in France. So we have a bit of wiggle room still. I'm not too panicked because, quite frankly, people didn't pay wealth tax often anyway. I mean, a lot of people managed to wrap up most of their belongings into, you know, into some sort of corporate envelope where it wasn't included. But whether that this time round they try to go after that, we'll have to wait and see. But, you know, the fact is that every government needs more money. The deficit is getting higher and higher, and you know, taxes will increase everywhere. I think it's just where it's the least worst, really.
Well, that leads on to a good question from Maria, who asked, and this is one for you, Simon, to get a bit of an oversight and overview on wealth tax and inheritance planning as well for a purchase.
Okay, I mean, wealth tax at the moment, wealth tax is only levied on property, on real estate. And there are one or two things that you should bear in mind. Firstly, if the property in France is your main home, i.e. you're a French resident and it's your principal residence, only 70% of the value of the property counts for wealth tax. The threshold is 1.3 million. So if the only property you own is your main home in France, it's going to be worth more than 1.8 million for you to be even approaching the wealth tax net. The other thing is, for those people who are coming out of the UK into France, if you retain property in the UK for the first 5 years of French residence, the non-French properties don't count in the equation. So those two things together probably mean that most people who are coming into France for the first time won't be anywhere near the threshold. But of course, if you've got a big property portfolio in the UK, it might be a problem longer term if you retain that property portfolio. The potential changes, well, we don't know. I mean, Monsieur Macron has already said that over his dead body, I think, to paraphrase, will there be a left-wing prime minister? So some of the really drastic, radical stuff that the far left might want to do may not ever come to pass. There may have to be a bit of horse trading, and there might be a fudge here and there. But don't forget that the current wealth tax is Macron's baby. He brought it in the first place. So I think he will fight very hard against anyone who wants to make significant changes to that. So I think for the time being, at least, we can probably work on the current situation. And the other thing I think that we should bear in mind is that the French president has the ability to dissolve parliament once a year if he wants to. So if he doesn't get what he wants in 11 months' time, he can call another election.
Leading on to a question from Martin Hall, who was asking around the tax liabilities if a property that they were purchasing was going to be put into the buy-to-let holiday rental market. So what kind of tax liabilities are there if you're renting out an investment property, for want of a better expression, that you might holiday in?
Yeah, I mean, on that one, it doesn't matter whether you're actually physically French resident or if you're still resident in the UK and just letting it to holiday makers. The general principle is that property income is always taxed in the country where the property sits. So if you've got a property in France and you're letting it on holiday rentals, you will always be paying tax in France on it. If you are UK resident, you'll also possibly have some UK tax to pay. But the basic thing in France, the simplest form, is that you declare the amount of income you receive, but only 50% of it counts towards tax. That's in its simplest form. Now, I could spend a few hours talking about the less simple forms, but I don't expect people really want that. But the basic principle is that property income is always taxed in the country it arises in.
And for the moment, I think you'd agree, Simon, is that tax foncière is still reasonable in France, isn't it? I mean, people say, yes, some communes have put a surtax on résidence secondaire, but it doesn't really mean a lot. You know, in reality, it's not a huge amount of money.
No, I mean, I think it's not a problem that is peculiar to France. I mean, all over the world, there are parts. I mean, I've got a sister who lives in Cornwall, and they've got the same problem in Cornwall, where people are buying properties and Airbnb-ing them and pricing locals out of the market. So there is this sort of drive to try and increase taxation on second homes. But you're right, Trevor. It's still manageable. I don't know local authority is going to price people out of the market so much that it kills their region. So they've got to walk a tightrope with that one, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Next series of questions is around mortgages. Quite a few people were asking around mortgages now that they're a little bit more accessible than they might have been in prior years. Some questions around whether or not an EU resident gets more favourable mortgages and mortgage rates. And indeed, Trevor, to your point earlier, there is more available than there were. And obviously, the big difference for most people coming from elsewhere is the term of the lending. So you can obviously plan the cost of that mortgage over a lot longer term than most Brits are conventionally used to, with only a 2, 3 or 5 year term in a majority of cases. Trevor, can you comment on what the mortgage?
Funnily enough, we've got very few people applying for mortgages at the moment. The majority of buyers this year have all been cash buyers. So it would seem that either it's inherited money or whether it's like from the sale of their home. But in the past, we had a much greater demand for mortgages than we're currently getting from non-residents. And that's whether they're Belgian, Dutch, British, American. I mean, for Americans, it's pretty much impossible anyway. I mean, Americans are great. I mean, one thing they are pleased about is the housing taxes, which are peanuts compared to the USA. You know, they can't believe it.
One of the questions around health, yeah, health is a lot more cost effective, should we say, in France than it is in the US. The other thing to mention is the ease of access to it as well. If you do feel poorly or fall poorly even, if the GP or the doctor keeps you waiting long days, they normally apologise, whereas in the UK you barely get through to the receptionist over a few days, right? So a very different health.
The French are complaining about the health service at the moment, but it still leaps and bounds above anybody else. I mean, it's just in a completely different league, but the French just love to complain about anything.
Yeah,
anyway.
that's a national sport. We do.
Yeah.
Actually, if you talk to a
I
Frenchman
haven't
who
got
doesn't comply,
my
he's probably
5-star room to myself with its own bath and shower and 22-inch TV. Oh dear.
One Health, as we're jumping around a bit, Fab, can you give some more content and information around the ease of insurances and health insurance? There's a few questions that came in around ease of access, what the timelines look like. A few have asked for kind of cost examples as well, which I appreciate might be a bit difficult to answer, but give us some context over 5-10 minutes around insurance, please.
Yeah, it's much. I mean, we've gone a long way, especially since Brexit. This was kind of a mess. Requirements for, so we're talking about visas. I mean, the first step, and then once you can apply into the French healthcare system, which we call CPAM, because we also love acronyms on top of complaining. So to get a visa or sometimes a residency permit, if you're not yet part of the French system, you do need to have private medical insurance or some sort of private medical insurance. And in the wake of Brexit, this was a mess. The requirements were very stiff. It was very difficult to find a policy, and policies were very costly. And then the rules have been loosened up a bit. In many countries, it's much more relaxed now, especially in the US, for example. In the UK, it's still kind of apply the rules by the book, although the definition of what they expect for a medical insurance for a visa application has been has been made easier. Let's say it's less strict than, you know, before. They wanted basically you to have the equivalent of a contrat responsable in France. So now it's more like in and outpatient benefit, and that's it. They still want, for example, a policy without deductibles or an excess, which obviously skyrockets the premium. Even if like a 50 euro excess is probably manageable by anyone, but still they want something without an excess. So these are rules that may evolve and may bring the premium down. For now, these are the current rules and there's no change on the horizon. However, the rules are now well known and the prices for premiums are really, I mean, you know, like before, people will be buying from Bupa, for example, or US providers like Cigna or others, which now you'd find French offers like ours, obviously, but also others, which are at least 2, 3, or 4 times cheaper, sometimes significantly. So if you want an example of a premium, like someone in the late 50s, that would be less than 2,000 euros for a full annum for one person. That's just an example of the kind of policy, and that's before you're part of the French system. Then once you're part of the French system, you can slash that figure by 2 again. So it's more like 1,000 per person, again, late 50s, probably even lower than that. And also on monthly installment once you're part of the system. And we have kind of a posh fancy word for that. We call that a mutual, which is kind of top-up health insurance. And you really do want to get that because that's also one of my,
doesn't it? I mean, our mutual at work for my staff has gone up by about 25, 30 euros.
Yeah,
a month. It's a lot.
Because actually, it's something that also another Macron's baby, which is called the 100% santé, which is, I mean, the idea is really nice. Like the general idea is whatever you do, even for dentistry, glasses, you would always get an option free of charge. But basically, you put all the burden onto mutuals, which obviously we've had to pay more than 2 billion per annum extra since 2020. So, well, it's now being compensated through the premiums, and so it ends the increase. But it's still very reasonable compared to
Yeah,
private medical insurance in the UK or, well, obviously in the US. Like this, it would be a
I mean,
no-brainer.
we're paying about 130 for a couple with 2 children, for example.
Yeah.
And a single person's about 100 euros a month. Obviously, we pay for that for our staff. It's an obligation in France. You have to pay the mutual for your staff, which is, but I mean, yeah, no, I mean, it's still cheap. It's just we were used to paying even less.
And even if you have like 4 crowns, you know, like you have a massive dental job to do, you would get at least whatever the dentist you choose. You can go to the most expensive dentist in France. It will have the legal obligation. So the equivalent of the private doctor in the UK, it will have the legal obligation to provide you with at least 1 quote free of charge for you. Well, like you'd have a couple hours out of pocket. So we would not say it's free of charge, but like, well, it's safe to make the assumption it's kind of free.
What I'd also highlight as well, when people are going through visas, which is a topic we'll come on to in a moment, when visas get rejected or there's challenges to get through visas, in a majority of cases as a result of the health insurance that you're getting as part of that. So health is a very important part as part of that visa process.
Yeah, although rejected would not be the word I'd use, because also something I like to say, like point blank rejections for visas pretty much aren't a thing, at least from the UK or the US or like English speaking countries. It's more like the visa is not directly accepted, and they always offer the applicant a chance to fix it. So, and the leading cause for these rejections from the UK is actually a non-compliant insurance, indeed. But most of the time, eventually, as they fix the mistake, they'll probably get the visa. So it's just to say, like, rejection is like it's a hard no, and then you need a lawyer or something to appeal the case. Whereas it's a pain, like you'll have to amend the intended start date or whatever, but you can fix the mistake. So you probably don't want to end up this way anyway, because it may cost you some pennies. But so that's why, well, come to us or other people to make sure it's compliant straight away. But yes, yeah, you're right, Steve. Yeah.
Thank you. Simon, a question for you, going back from a wealth perspective. A few have asked around wealth planning at different stages of their visa process. So lots of different visas that you can go through, which we'll come on to briefly. Obviously, it's a whole subject for many hours in itself anyway. But what are the takeaway points from a wealth planning perspective in conjunction with a visa application journey?
Well, our area of expertise is in advising people who are looking to set up permanent home in France. So not people who are looking to buy a holiday home and want a visa so they can do more than their 3 months that they're entitled to under the new rules. So we're looking at people who are actually to set up home properly in France. And the main thing to take on board is, well, 2 things, I suppose. One, get the right advice. And it is the commercial from us, you know, speak to the right people, speak to people who know what they're up to. But more, as importantly, make sure you do things in the right order. Because there are things that you should do whilst you're still in the UK system before you arrive in France. And there are things that you probably should leave alone until you get into the French system. Very simple example, ISAs are brilliant in the UK. Tax-free savings, you chuck in money each and every year, and if you've done it from way back when they used to be called PACs, you've probably got a massive portfolio that is totally free of tax in the UK. However, you move to France, that becomes a taxable portfolio, and it's not taxable from the point at which you arrive in France. The French taxman will look back to the very beginning. So if you arrive in France with a big ISA portfolio and then try to sell it once you've set up home in France and are a French tax resident, the French taxman will say, thank you very much, and charge you a lot of money for it. So restructure as you exit the UK, take advantage of the tax break the UK gives you on the ISA, and then reinvest in something that looks maybe like an ISA, but is suitable for French tax purposes. And that's just one example. But the main thing is do it in the right order. Get your advice as early in the piece as you can, because then you're more likely to get it right. Whereas if you panic and you say, I'm moving tomorrow morning and I need to do something, it's probably too late by then.
We've had many cases where clients have unfortunately had tax bills of 5-figure sums as a result of falling exactly into that mistake. So a big point that all of the services that you've got in front of you here will suggest and recommend, for the right reasons, to avoid the pitfalls and make this as stress-free as possible. Engage with a specialist, engage with the experts as early as you can in that journey. All of us offer free value and free consultations to give you more information and education, so you can importantly make that informed decision as to how you're planning that in move or investment that you might be making. Good point, very well made. Right, next topic, back onto some politics, I'm afraid. Some forecasts for yourself, Trevor, around how in the next few months with this political change, are we expecting any change on the property market? Some have asked whether or not there's any seasonality.
Yeah, I mean, it's only really, I mean, there was a proposition by Macron before the election that he was starting to say, we haven't heard a lot about it and we won't hear anything now till September, but I do think they'll go ahead with something for first-time buyers. Most of that will affect younger French families who want to buy. They will probably abolish stamp duty. I would imagine that they would go. I can't imagine the left opposing it. I can't imagine anyone opposing it. It's just how do they pay for it? I mean, there's obviously going to be a cost to the government taking away stamp duty. I think the threshold talked about was up to 250 on a first-time for a first-time buyer. So, you know, tax exempt. Would that apply to non-residents? EU first-time buyers working in France? Yes. But unfortunately for the Brits, thanks to Brexit, I don't think they will benefit from it. I mean, there's somebody who was actually living in France as a French resident at that point and buying their first home. Yes, they probably would. That will push the market from the bottom up. So that could get a lot of people onto the market. It means they won't have to worry about borrowing the notaires fees. The notaires fees will be closer to 2% instead of 7%. As I say, nothing's been confirmed. It was only talk before the elections. I don't know if you guys have heard any more about it. I don't think there's been any further progress on that front.
No, what I think in regard to the current state of the parliament, I don't see anything from happening at least the following month, because
it's very difficult to agree anything, but I mean, I think something like that to help young people will go through. It's one of the things they probably will agree on, but I can't see them agreeing on a lot, which is why, as we said before, there is a really strong chance that there will be another election within 12 months. You know.
Yeah, but maybe after 2025's budget that be voting in, because they need to find the money for 2025's budget already. So I think the following 3-6 months we're good. Like nothing should change on the financial standpoint.
Yeah, I mean that would be a big boost.
So to say on that point, I mean, obviously it does depend who we end up with in charge or as Prime Minister, whether it's this idea of a statesman who can put all parties together, which is the latest one doing the rounds. But I think the cynic in me would say, well, even if it's a statesman who can pull everyone together, he could probably only do that for a short period of time until the bickering starts again. So I think you're right. There's probably unlikely to be significant change in the foreseeable future.
Equally, though, you know, the market has never been a boom bust in France. I mean, the one advantage we got when we have a bust, it's never a disaster. I've been here since 1989, and quite frankly, you know, we don't see the booms and we don't see the busts, really. I mean, we get inflation, we get deflation, but it's never quite as dramatic as it is in the UK or Holland.
Yeah, thanks for the fixed rates. Think.
Well, next little topic of conversation is around inheritance and planning and power of attorneys, which is something I'm going to put up. So a few questions have come in from Samantha, Stephanie, Lisa, Pamela asked along this phone as well. So this is around the best ways of estate planning and also wealth planning around inheritance and around power of attorneys in France and the cost of how to do that and who would do that. So comments from you all on those topics for me, kindly.
Well, I kick off. I can talk more about the inheritance thing. I mean, the main thing to realise for people coming out of the UK system is that the French system is very different. There are two major differences. The first one is that in France, it's not the estate that pays the tax on your death, it's the individual beneficiaries, and the rates of tax and the allowances that people get are determined by the relationship between them and the person leaving them the money. For example, children get €100,000 tax-free allowance from parents. There are small bands at 5, 10 and 15%. They pay 20% basically on the next 500,000 or so. So the rates for children in France are fairly manageable compared to the UK. But at the other extreme, if you leave money to somebody who's not related to you, and that includes someone, even if you're living with them, if you're not married to them or not paxed with them, or a civil partnership, 1,594 euros free of tax, 60% tax on the rest. So if you get it wrong, it's very expensive. Not necessarily for you because you're no longer around, but for whoever you wanted to have the money, the French taxman is better off than the person you wanted to have the money. Now, there are planning tools around it, and I won't go into great detail here because it's not really the place for it, but there are planning tools that you can use to try to protect your assets from succession tax to some extent and to avoid that 60% tax bill. And the other thing to note is that the other major difference between the French and the UK system is that in France, they have this notion of reserved heirs. You can't disinherit your kids basically under French law. Your children have an automatic right to a part of the deceased or to a part of the deceased parent's estate. Now, there are ways of not necessarily circumventing it completely, but managing it so that when one of the couple dies, they're not left destitute because the kids have run off with all the money. But again, you need to get the right planning in place so that your aims and objectives are met.
That's another big topic, which in itself could have many hours to discuss. So it's again, highlighting there from Simon how expensive things can be if it hasn't been discussed and planned.
Yeah,
so
it's really important. I mean, you know, I see it all the time, obviously, when people bring their properties to market, and often, you know, people who have inherited property, you know, they inherit it they go and to make the silly mistake sometimes of ending up paying capital gains tax because they've declared the property at the lowest possible value for inheritance, and then end up paying capital gains tax thinking they've been clever, you know, and they just got the wrong advice. You know, unfortunately, there's all sorts of rumours and things that get flying around, and you really need to speak to a specialist because, you know, what the sort of information I see flying around on some of these forums and things is absolutely loony. It's
a big.
People don't know what they're talking about.
You'll see lots of people in the audience as well might well be intrigued to do some self-learning, some self-education and some self-Googling, and everyone can go down these rabbit holes of Facebook groups.
It's complex as well. I mean, every individual case is different.
What I'd also highlight is people, the easiest to find are normally some of the oldest posts, which might not have even been factually correct at the time of posting, but probably are not correct and live now. So seek the live, most common, most recent advice by the specialists you've got here is something that we really recommend.
Generally speaking, it's better to give something away where you're alive and keep using your free, which means the use of whatever your asset is that you've given away, and get the thing done before you're dead. That is the way to do it. But nobody thinks they're going to die. That's the problem.
They just.
Well, immortal until we're dead.
Well, it leads us on to selling as well, which is a point that some people have been asking as well. So I've had a few people that have mentioned, so Lena has mentioned that they're planning on selling and downsizing from a large place to a smaller place closer to town as part of their stage in life, I suppose, perhaps. What's the commentary around how difficult it is to sell at the moment? Back to your prior point, Trevor, this is something that we see around the world, really, that people bring property to market when it is sunnier and the photos look better. And as a result, there does seem to be a bit of a change at the moment for our buyers to the sellers.
You know, remarkably, I would have thought with all the doom and gloom around, there would be a rush of people trying to sell, but it really isn't the case. I'm surprised. You know, I expected a huge glut of property to market and, you know, and be struggling to find buyers. But we've got a good steady stream of serious cash buyers, and we've got a good steady stream of vendors, but it's really, the numbers of vendors hasn't increased really year on year, slightly, but not really anything to write home about. But we're getting some nice properties and getting good money for them for the vendors. They're happy. It's surprising, and we have had an uptick over the last 3 months, which has been remarkable. You know, it really, I didn't expect it at all, to be honest. And the only thing I can put it down to is the bottleneck, really, the fact that the market has been quite slow since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. Literally within as I said before, within 3 or 4 weeks of the beginning of the war, panic set in and the whole bloody thing went to, you know, whatever. and I didn't expect it to recover, but it has. It's seeming to recover. So there seems to be some confidence. I mean, I didn't expect it, but there seems to be some confidence out there in the market. And I think people are fed up with waiting as well. They're just going to get on with their lives and they want to get on with it and maybe think that things aren't going to change for a while. I've seen this before. You know, this is pretty much how we came out of 2008. It was very slow, but it just, you know, it recovered. It always does. I mean, but there's a lot of doom and gloom people out there going, oh, we haven't seen the beginning of it yet. It's going to get much worse. Well, you know, it really doesn't seem to be. I mean, obviously, we all know that the real problem is going to be as soon as we see an end to the war in Ukraine, that things will definitely improve. But looking at it, it could go on for years.
And what I'd also comment is, please don't assume that all agents are the same as well. There are a lot out in France, but Trevor and the Leggett team represent over 10% of international clients buying and selling. So dealing with a good, a proactive and value-adding agent will make all the difference in an easy purchase or easy sell, rather than perhaps more of the remote conventional ways of taking photos, putting on portals and praying. Seems to be what a lot of agents do.
Now the clients are coming from like sort of all over the world. It's bonkers. I had a meeting this morning with a partner with Indonesia. You know, it's some Indonesian buyers that, you know, you didn't expect it. I mean, it's a very different world to what it was a few years back. And the clients are coming from all over the planet. I mean, we've got clients from Turkey, from Mexico, from North Africa, from East, you know, Southeast Asia, and a lot of expats working overseas, coming back to retire in France. A lot. So, and a lot of Americans all of a sudden are things. So although we've got less of everything, we're getting sort of from a much wider panel of buyers. You know, our UK buyers used to represent 50% of our buyers. Today they're probably around 27, 28% of our buyers. Still a lot, but obviously Brexit's had its toll on that. So and the UK economy as well hasn't fully recovered, to say the least. You know, I'm quite hopeful that France actually is still a very desirable place to live. You know, we wouldn't all be living here if it wasn't the case, and that it's still as attractive as ever to a lot of people, and being discovered by new clients from other parts of the world.
Yes, yeah, the world is getting smaller, and as a result, there's more property available on socials and YouTube as well, which is also a good way of looking at videos and getting a better understanding of not just the property, but everything around the property, from the local shops and the notary's office and the markets, as well as obviously your local wealth specialist as well, to go and see why you're there. Back onto visas, because there's been a few more questions that have been coming in around visa applications. Fab, probably the best thing here is to give a bit more of a summary and a breakdown of the different visa options that people can review, because obviously there's a few out there to consider, and what the kind of timelines are involved in that, and also what kind of information would need to be provided as part of that application. Something that people aren't always aware of is that there can be an interview as part of that visa process, which people are unaware of normally when they start. So perhaps a bit more context and information on that, if you don't mind, please, for the audience.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll try to make it quick because there's a lot to cover as well here. But basically, whatever the type of visa, always boils down to meeting three main pillars. I feel like a parrot at say that because I say that all the time, but it's basically a safe place to live, what they call the proof of address, proof of income, and proof of medical coverage. So proof of address, either one of three things that are compliant. You need obviously to have bought a place, and that's only when you get the acte de vente authentique, which is the certificate proof of ownership, that if you've put down an offer, it's non-compliant, you need to have the proof of ownership, or a rental agreement, but a formal rental contract, not an Airbnb, or something called an attestation d'hébergement, which is basically someone having you around, like is someone happy having you in their place. That's either one of those three. There's no other way that's visa compliant. Proof of income, that could also be savings. Basically, you should be making the equivalent of France minimum wage, which at the minute is 1,400 net a month, roughly. or savings, 12 times the amount on a checking account, or some sort of liquid savings. Could be in GBP, USD, that doesn't matter. Well, you just have to obviously consider the currency exchange rate, because you need to meet the rate in euros, but it's safe to have the money on a foreign bank account. And the proof of medical coverage, most of the time it translates into proof of insurance. But for example, if you're British, you have state pension from the UK, you can use, as one of the post-Brexit agreements, you can use something called the S1 program, which is a European program. Basically, I would act instead of medical insurance. So for some people, and if you're European, for example, you don't need medical insurance. You can use something much like travel insurance or something that would be compliant. So, but that's basically 3 pillars. In terms of time frame, ideally, I mean, you can start the application process for a visa very early, but it starts once you're able to have a fixed date in mind, something like the 15th of August, of September, something, a fixed date. If you like, yeah, by the end of the year, or like in December, well, part of the application process requires you to input a fixed date. So you need a fixed date. Once you have that, you can work your way, well, actually backwards to do all the paperwork. So you can start as early as you'd like, because this is done online. But the ideal for me, the ideal application window is 3 to 1 month prior to the visa, the intended arrival date. If you're less than 1 month away from the date, it's too late. You'll need to postpone the date. You need to leave the admin, the consulate, at least 1 month to process your file. So in terms of visa options, well, there are quite a few. The most popular is basically all the non-workers. That would be retirees, remote workers, considering they have no activity, like they're not working for a French employer or something. Small JIT owners, like if they don't exceed 20% of an index called the PASS, which basically is 23,000 euros. And well, non-workers in general, so retirees, non-workers. That's a type of visa called the visitor visa. There are also business owners. If you want to run a bigger kind of JIT, or do a little lets, but aim to exceed 23,000 euros per annum, or maybe you want to open a shop or a cafe or whatever, then there are different types of business visas. The most popular popular ones being the entrepreneur visa or the profession libérale visa. Yeah, and also obviously work visa. If you're employed by a French company, this one is harder to secure, because actually the main thing stopping, for example, Brits to get a French contract in the first place when they're not yet in France is that they don't have a French social security number, and that's what a French employer would be looking for. So and if they want to hire you, it becomes their responsibility to make sure you're part of the French system. So obviously it creates an extra friction, which most employers aren't happy with, actually, the French ones. So, but basically, yeah, these are the most popular types of visas. The time frame being something like 3 months, ideally. And also, you mentioned the steps. It's you apply online, then you'll have to go through an in-person interview in your home country. So let's say in the UK, there are 3 visa centers in the UK, like London, Manchester, and Edinburgh. Sorry for the pronunciation. And then you can, well, if it's approved, so they'll keep the original of your passport, by the way, guys. This is a new page in your passport. So, well, obviously they have to manufacture that. So the turnover is usually something like a couple of weeks, but well, I've seen as quick as 3 days, depends on how busy they are. Given that it's the Olympics, if you're doing something like right now, it's probably going to be 2 or 3 weeks. And then you move to France at the intended arrival date. Within the first 3 months, you need to activate the visa. You'll have to go through a medical exam. It's not a test, okay? They just want to make sure you're up to date with the vaccine. And if not, they'll offer you some appointment for, well, in France, the test, I mean, that medical exam is all for free. So I'm saying it before, it's a joke, but it's something I like to say. I'm lobbying very hard so that part of the test include a blood sample so that they can test for the wine intake to see if you support the French economy. But I didn't manage to get that voted in as of yet. So, or maybe blindfold you so that there is like a blindfolded cheese test or something. I don't know. No, but then once you get the test done, the medical exam, then you're basically okay. You have to wait for 90 days. Then you can apply into French National Health Care, which we call CPAM, and then you're good. Mostly, I mean, there may be some tax implications or other implications, but in terms of French admin, you're pretty much good. Maybe the driver license exchange and other bits like that. But basically, you can wait up until the visa expires. When the visa is about to expire, usually 2 or 3 months before it expires, same logic as for the visa. You don't wait until it's less than 30 days from expiry. Then you can apply for residency. And then you'll have a 1-year residency permit that you can renew. It becomes discretionary at this stage, but like the general idea is that they'll renew it 2 or 3 times, so that's 5 years total. Then they'll give you a multi-year permit, usually a 5 years one, and then the permanent 10 years permit. It's kind of a lot of information, but that's basically the process.
Or you can apply for French nationality.
Yeah, after 5 years, yeah, you can do that. If you're a bit of a masochist, yeah, you can do that.
I just got mine.
Yeah.
Are you? I mean, because the French test
On that point,
the civic test.
I applied for it 4.5 years ago, and I'm still waiting.
Oh.
Yeah, no, it took 3 years, so you must be getting close, Simon.
Who knows?
So how was the civic test, Trevor?
Oh my God, it was quite funny. I shouldn't say this on here really, but there you go. It was comical. It was, hey? I can't hear you.
I can't hear you, Steve.
Steve, you're off. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't hear you. No, it was comical. I mean, obviously the Prefet invited everybody to their, their initiation ceremony, where everybody had to sing the Marseillaise, of course, and be very patriotic. Which, of course, I'd actually taken the time to learn all 13 verses of the Marseillaise. But they only wanted 3 of them. After about 5, they told me to shut up.
And were there a couple of glasses of wine, and they ask you which one is Bordeaux, which one is Burgundy?
Encouraging anyone to drink and drive. There was no alcohol. I was really disappointed.
Oh yeah.
There I was at my French initiation, and they offered me apple juice. Can you believe it?
Apple juice. Very
serious.
Sounds like British.
Well, in England, we'd have had a pint. They'd have offered them a pint of beer.
As you can tell, we all have fun here, but if you didn't follow all the steps, it has been recorded, so you can go back through that. And obviously, as we come up to the hour, I just want to thank everyone for your contribution and access late into the evening. Thank you everyone for the questions that have been submitted, and we've had, as I said, over 100 submitted questions, a couple of hundred people registered for the event. So we'll be sharing the video and bits and pieces for everyone to go back onto. Main takeaways from me before I pass over to everyone is obviously just make sure that you talk to all of the specialists, all the experts as part of your journey as early as you can. Yes, we do joke and laugh as we go, but doing this, the decades we have between us, we've been doing this a lot to help clients make this journey as fun and as enjoyable and avoid the pitfalls that others can fall into. But thank everyone for joining us again. Any lasting recommendation? What's your top recommendation, guys, that you're going to pass to everyone while we say goodbye to everybody today?
Well, I think I've been in our contracts team today, and I've realised how complex it is. To be honest with you, buying a property these days, it's a lot more work than it ever used to be, and the agents have a lot to do on the ground, and I don't think people realise quite how much. So it's always better to be in the hands of a professional, especially to get through what it is now. I mean, there's layers and layers of legislation introduced every year, and they are worth their fees. Although people complain about them non-stop, there's a lot to do.
Thank you, Simon. Your passing comment or recommendation?
I mean, I would echo that point. That basically. France, don't be scared. France is a fantastic country. You have to like paperwork if you want to live in France, but it is a fantastic country. It can work for almost everyone, provided you get the right advice at the right time and speak to the experts as early as you can. As soon as you think you've made that decision, I want to go live in France, or I want to buy a property in France, go and speak to the people who know what they're up to. Even if you end up changing your mind later on, at least you go into whatever you go into fully armed with all the knowledge you need.
I abide by Simon and Trevor's advice, and it's also something France wants you around, basically, well, just from a financial standpoint, but also culturally speaking. And I'm sure Simon and Trevor has been welcomed like by the natives. They usually, when you're foreign, the French will love it. Like, oh, where are you from? Can you tell us about the country? And so the bit of advice I would share is just don't be afraid. It's doable. Like Simon was saying, it's doable if you plan ahead. It's actually very often more simple than you think, especially if you get the right advice. It's just make sure you speak with experts. That should be fine, and hopefully as simple as Frenchly possible.
Well, again, thank you, everybody. Good luck with your journeys. We look forward to talking to you. As a follow-up, bear in mind that you'll get an email with everyone's contact details. So a big apology to those that we haven't answered the questions, because there's been a lot. We've tried to go through as well as we can. And bear in mind that we'll be reaching out, having a conversation with you for feedback, good, bad, and indifferent, and equally to help support you in your journey over to France. So as for me, thank you again, and good luck and enjoy. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Good evening.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.